Have you ever given your whole heart to something, only to have it dismissed in front of everyone? What would you do if the people you once called family turned their backs not with cruelty, but with quiet judgment? The kind that cuts deeper, Maggie, a soft-spoken woman with calloused hands and a soul stitched from sacrifice, walked into her sister's high society wedding carrying a gift made of memories, not gold, not luxury, just love, woven square by square into a homemade quilt. But love in that room wasn't enough. She was laughed at, silenced, forgotten. And in that moment, she had a choice. Would she shrink and accept her place in their polished world of pretense, or quietly remind them what real wealth looks like? What would you have done? This is not just a story about sisters, or weddings, or class. It's a story about visibility, about choosing love when you have every reason to walk away. And it might just remind you of someone you used to be. If this touches even a corner of your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter. Now, come sit with us. Let's begin. They laughed. Not loud, not in the way children laugh when something's funny. No, this was different, quieter, crueler. The kind of laughter that carries more judgment than joy. I heard it as soon as I stepped into the reception hall of the Fairmont Grand in downtown Chicago. My heels clicked softly on the marble floor, almost drowned by the swell of music and chatter, but it wasn't hard to hear the tone in their voices, those carefully controlled whispers from a group of young women in sleek gowns clustered near the gift table. "Is that fabric?" one of them said, tilting her champagne flute as if to balance her disbelief with amusement. "Maybe a dish towel," another giggled. "I didn't even know people still wrapped gifts in cloth." They didn't know I could hear them. Or maybe they did. Maybe they just didn't care. I stood still for a second longer than I should have, clutching the small bundle in my hands. It was wrapped in white muslin, tied with a blue satin ribbon I'd saved from a box of old holiday decorations. Nothing fancy, nothing store-bought, just honest. But in this place, honest didn't seem to count for much. I took a deep breath and walked forward, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. The room smelled like roses and wealth, two things I'd grown distant from over the years. Everywhere I looked were chandeliers, gold accents, and waiters who looked more expensive than my entire outfit. The gift table was a shrine to opulence. Louis Vuitton boxes, envelopes from Saks, thick gold-embossed wrapping paper, topped with bows that looked like they'd cost more than my monthly grocery bill. And there, right at the edge, I placed my package. It looked out of place, like someone had set a mason jar next to a crystal vase. Still, I smoothed the corner of the ribbon, then stepped back, just in time to hear another voice, one that made the ache in my stomach twist a little deeper. "Oh, she must be the sister," someone murmured, not bothering to lower their voice. "The one who teaches. I heard she still lives in Iowa." As if that were a crime. I didn't look up. I knew better. When you spend enough time being overlooked, you learn how to disappear before someone makes you feel like you should. My name is Margaret Hartley. Most people call me Maggie. I'm the older sister, the simple one, the one who didn't chase city lights or family names with old money behind them. Caroline, my younger sister, is the bride, or rather, she was 2 hours ago. She married into the Whitmore family. You might have seen their name on buildings or plaques in universities. Her wedding made the local papers, and not just in Iowa. It was the kind of celebration that felt more like an awards gala than a union of love. I arrived late to the ceremony. Not by intention. I'd stayed up the night before finishing my gift, stitching well past midnight, hands trembling from fatigue, but my heart full of something I couldn't explain. Pride, hope, a little fear, probably all of it. I hadn't seen Caroline since Christmas. Even then, it felt like she'd already drifted miles away from the sister I grew up with, sharing bunk beds and secrets, watching fireflies from our bedroom window. We used to make each other birthday cards with construction paper and Crayola markers. She used to call me her best friend. I wonder when that changed. Maybe when I chose to stay behind. Or maybe when she chose to forget where we came from. I walked alone to my assigned table, in the far corner of the ballroom. Table 17. Between a cousin I hadn't seen in a decade and a man from Bryce's law firm who didn't seem to remember my name even after I introduced myself twice. From where I sat, I could see Caroline across the room, radiant in lace and pearls. She laughed with ease, surrounded by polished people in tailored tuxedos. She looked happy. And yet, when her eyes briefly met mine, I saw something flicker across her face. Recognition, then hesitation, and finally, avoidance. I turned away before I could register what that meant. The cocktail hour began. I stood near the window, letting the fading light pour over my shoes. They were scuffed near the heel, the kind of scuff you don't notice until you're surrounded by perfection. I looked out over the skyline, trying to remember why I'd come. To show support, to feel like I still had a place in her life. Or maybe, deep down, I hoped the gift I brought would speak what I couldn't find the words to say anymore. Behind me, the whispers rose again. "Oh my God, it's from her," someone said, giggling. "The sister. The one who brought the quilt." My chest tightened. I stayed where I was. She should have just Venmo'd $20. Might have saved her the embarrassment. The laughter sliced through the soft jazz playing in the background. My ears burned. I wanted to sink into the floor. I stared at the skyline harder, like it might offer an escape. But then I heard it. The words that would change everything. Buzz. Buzz. My phone lit up. Just landed. Be there in 30. Sam. My fingers trembled slightly as I held the screen. I hadn't told Sam everything. Not the whispers, not the looks, not the ache in my chest that started the moment I stepped into that ballroom. But somehow, he always knew. I didn't know what he'd say when he arrived. I didn't know what he had in mind. All I knew was something was about to shift, and none of them were ready for what my husband was about to do. Caroline used to braid my hair every Saturday morning. We'd sit cross-legged on the back porch of our childhood home, two giggling girls with grass-stained knees and wild ideas about the future. She always braided too tight, but I never told her. That was just her way, precise, focused, a little stubborn. Even back then, Caroline had this hunger for more. Not more love, we had plenty of that, but more world, more places, more names, more sparkle. Me, I was always more drawn to the quiet things. The sound of wind slipping through cornfields. The way Dad's voice softened when he read the paper aloud. The rhythm of Mom's wooden spoon scraping the edges of the pot on Sundays. We grew up in a farmhouse outside Madison County, Iowa. Not poor, not rich, just regular folks. My dad was a mechanic. Mom worked part-time at the post office and raised us like her whole life depended on it. We shared a bedroom with wallpaper that peeled at the edges and a window that overlooked the west pasture. At night, we'd lie on our backs, staring at the ceiling, telling stories until one of us fell asleep mid-sentence. Caroline was my best friend, my only sibling, my built-in secret keeper. And then, life did what life does. It pulled. She got a scholarship to Northwestern University. We cried in the driveway the day she left her trunk packed, her cheeks pink with excitement, mine damp with goodbye. At first, she called every other night, told me about her classes, her roommate who collected porcelain cats, the city noises that kept her awake. We'd laugh like nothing had changed. But gradually, the calls slowed, first weekly, then monthly, then holidays. I understood. Life was full for her. Fast, shiny, demanding. She was learning how to glide in heels and pronounce foreign wines. I never blamed her, not really. After high school, I stayed in Iowa, went to a local college, got my teaching degree, started working at the elementary school down the road from where we grew up. That's where I met Sam. He wasn't flashy, no fancy car, no practiced charm, just a man with warm eyes and a quiet steadiness that felt like home. He'd show up at the school's community events, volunteering for things no one else wanted to do, fixing the lighting in the auditorium, painting the basketball court lines by hand. On our first date, we sat under the old oak tree near the library, sharing a thermos of sweet tea and talking about books. He wore a flannel shirt with a frayed collar and boots that had seen better days. I liked him instantly. What I didn't know back then was that Sam had built a small tech startup out of his college dorm, sold it before I ever met him, started another and another, but you'd never guess it from his worn denim or the way he never checked his phone during a conversation. Money should be silent. He once told me, "Let your character do the talking." I loved him for that. Still do. Years passed. Caroline visited once, maybe twice a year. Each time, she seemed a little more polished, a little less familiar. One Thanksgiving, she brought Bryce. He was tall, handsome in that moneyed, effortless kind of way, the kind of man who made others feel underdressed without saying a word. He shook Dad's hand like he was offering a favor, complimented Mom's pie with the kind of praise that sounded rehearsed. Bryce came from a long line of people who didn't talk about money because they didn't need to. Their wealth was carved into marble walls and stitched into prep school blazers. I remember watching Caroline that weekend, how she seemed caught between two worlds, laughing at our old jokes, but checking her phone when no one noticed, smiling during grace, but glancing sideways when Mom served in mismatched dishes. After they left, Dad said, "She's not the same." And I said, "No, but she's still ours." The real shift came after their engagement. I got the call while I was watering the begonias on the front porch. "Maggie," she said, "we're getting married next spring, at the Fairmont Grand." I nearly dropped the hose. She was breathless, excited, rattling off details, gold-trimmed invitations, a jazz quartet, custom embroidery on the bridesmaids' robes. She paused just long enough to ask, "You'll be there?" "Right. Of course," I said. Wouldn't miss it. But even then, I knew something had changed. The invitation came 2 weeks later. Heavy cardstock, gold lettering, 3 inserts for registry links, dress code, and valet instructions. It felt more like a corporate gala than a wedding invite. That night, I sat with Sam on our porch swing, sipping coffee. I showed him the envelope. "I don't know what to get her," I said, thumbing the edges of the card. "Everything on the registry is... Maggie, who needs a $900 espresso machine?" Sam chuckled. "What does she need most?" I thought for a moment. "To remember who she is." He nodded, gently, like he already knew what I was thinking. "Then give her that." And that's how the idea came to me. Not all at once. More like a quiet whisper that built over a few days. I'd make her something that no store could offer. A quilt. But not just any quilt. A memory quilt. Something stitched with the pieces of our shared life. A swatch from the dress she wore to 8th grade graduation. A scrap of Mom's apron. A square of Dad's old work shirt. Little fragments of our past woven into something she could feel again. Something to remind her you came from love. And maybe, just maybe, that's still enough. The attic was warmer than I expected for early spring. Dust hung in the air like suspended memories, catching the morning light that spilled through the single-pane window above me. I'd climbed up there in an old flannel shirt and soft jeans, the kind I didn't mind kneeling in. Around me were boxes labeled in my mother's handwriting, holiday, keepsakes, Dad's old clothes, baby things, each one a time capsule, each one a thread waiting to be pulled. Sam had left for work already. He'd kissed the top of my head, like always, and said, "Take your time today. Let your heart do the choosing." And that's exactly what I intended to do. I opened the first box, and there it was, a piece of faded gingham fabric from one of Mom's aprons. The red had dulled over time, but I remembered it clearly. She wore it when baking apple pie every 4th of July. I pressed the fabric to my nose. It smelled like attic air now, but my mind filled in the rest: cinnamon, vanilla, the warm buzz of our childhood kitchen. That became the first piece. Then came more. A patch from Caroline's 8th grade choir dress. A swatch of Dad's denim jacket, the one he wore every Sunday like it was his version of a suit. A corner of the sheet set we shared, growing up the one with the tiny sunflowers printed in rows like they had somewhere to be. Each scrap carried a memory stitched into its very threads. And as I built the pile on the attic floor, I realized I wasn't just making a quilt. I was building a bridge. I began cutting that afternoon. The rotary blade sliced through fabric like a gentle whisper. And before long, I had stacks of squares arranged in uneven rows across the dining room table. Sam came home, set his briefcase down, and quietly walked over. He didn't say anything at first, just looked. "You've got Grandma's curtain in here," he said finally, fingers brushing a blue floral corner. She loved those curtains. I smiled. Remember how she used to sit with a cup of sweet tea by that window and wave at every car that passed? She waved whether she knew them or not. She said everybody needed to be seen at least once a day. Sam nodded. I think that's why you see people the way you do. I worked on the quilt every evening after dinner. Sam would read on the couch, sometimes with his glasses slipping down his nose, while I sat near the lamp and sewed stitch by stitch, row by row. My fingers grew sore, the pads calloused. I pricked myself more times than I could count. But each mark felt right, like a price paid willingly. It wasn't just fabric I was sewing. It was time, and love, and old laughter. It was 1,000 unsaid things wrapped in cotton and memory. One night, I found a strip of faded red plaid that had once been the lining of our shared childhood blanket, the kind we used to drag out into the yard for stargazing or reading side by side. I hesitated. Somehow, this one made my eyes sting. It wasn't expensive or beautiful, but it was us, worn down from years of closeness, stitched together by things we didn't even have words for. I sewed it into the center of the quilt, right where it belonged. By the 5th week, the quilt was nearly finished. I chose a simple cream cotton for the backing, something soft, something clean. I embroidered a small note in the corner with navy blue thread for Caroline, so you never forget where love began. I didn't sign Maggie. I didn't have to. The night before the wedding, I sat on the edge of the bed with the quilt folded in my lap. Sam walked into the room, tie loosened from a late call, and sat beside me. You okay? He asked. I nodded, but my throat felt tight. She might not get it. I said, it might just look homemade, cheap. Sam leaned back against the headboard. Then she's not the girl you grew up with. She isn't. I said softly, not always. He looked at me for a long moment. You're not trying to fix her, Maggie. You're just giving her a chance to remember. I rested my head on his shoulder. I think a lot about the last time we were close. Like, really close. He waited. It was before her first internship in Chicago. I continued. She cried the night before she left. Told me she was scared of becoming someone we wouldn't recognize. And I told her I'd always remember her, even if she forgot. Sam kissed the top of my head again, in that quiet way of his. Well, he whispered, that sounds like something a quilt could hold. The next morning, I wrapped the finished quilt in white muslin and tied it with the blue ribbon from Grandma's old sewing box. No tag, no card. If she opened it, she'd know. If she didn't, maybe she wasn't meant to. In the car, driving toward Chicago. The bundle sat on the passenger seat like a piece of my heart I'd laid bare. The highway blurred under gray skies, and I tried not to think too much about what people would say, about how it might be dismissed, about whether it would be enough. Instead, I focused on one truth. Love isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's a quiet offering. A stitched whisper across time. The Fairmont Grand Hotel looked more like a cathedral than a venue. Its marble pillars stretched skyward like they were holding up the clouds themselves. The revolving glass doors opened into a lobby, glittering with chandeliers the size of pickup trucks, and the kind of flower arrangements that made you wonder if a garden had been uprooted just for the occasion. I parked 2 blocks away to avoid valet. My car, 12 years old, paint faded from Iowa sun, and road salt wasn't something I wanted someone else to drive, let alone judge. The walk to the entrance felt longer than it should have. I passed strangers in floor-length gowns and tuxedos tailored to the breath. Everyone seemed to know where to go. Everyone moved with ease, except me, inside. The ballroom pulsed with soft jazz and subtle wealth. Servers glided across the floor in crisp black and white uniforms, carrying flutes of champagne and tiny hors d'oeuvres balanced on silver trays. The air smelled like roses and truffle oil. My navy blue dress, which I'd ironed twice the night before, suddenly felt outdated modest in a room of plunging necklines and designer silhouettes. The pearl earrings I wore mom's, passed down on my 25th birthday, looked quaint beside the diamond waterfalls dangling from earlobes around me. I clutched my gift tighter, the white muslin wrapping soft against my fingers, the satin ribbon pressed into my palm like a line I was scared to cross. "Excuse me," a voice purred beside me. A woman with smooth, silver-blonde hair and a gown that shimmered like morning dew smiled at me politely, but distantly. "You must be Maggie," she said, scanning me top to bottom in half a second. "Caroline's sister. She's spoken of you." Spoken. Past tense. Vague. "I'm Bryce's aunt, Marianne Whitmore. Lovely to meet you." I nodded, returned the smile. "Nice to meet you too." She glanced at the bundle in my arms. "Oh. Did you forget to wrap it?" I blinked. "No," I said, soft. "It's handmade." Her lips tightened slightly. Just a flicker. How thoughtful. And then, with the grace of someone born into social gymnastics, she excused herself before the conversation required real effort. The gift table sat near the stage, already heavy with expensive intentions. Glossy boxes wrapped in metallics and monograms. Bags from Tiffany's, Cartier, Bergdorf. A stack of thick envelopes, likely checks big enough to make a down payment. I stepped forward, carefully placed my gift in the corner, tucking it gently behind a tall, gilded box from someone named the Van Courts. My offering looked like something forgotten in the laundry room. Across the room, Caroline stood in a sea of silk and sequins. Her wedding gown was stunning off-the-shoulder ivory lace, fitted through the waist, flowing into a cathedral train. Her hair had been sculpted into soft waves that shimmered with gold pins. She looked every bit the magazine cover bride. For a second, our eyes met, and for a second, her smile faltered. She gave a small wave, tentative, like someone unsure whether the glass between us was real, and then turned back toward her bridesmaids, who were laughing at something I couldn't hear. My seat was at table 17, tucked near the back, between a distant cousin from Missouri and a junior associate from Bryce's firm who kept checking his watch. I stirred the lemon slice in my water and tried to make small talk. It fizzled fast. When the pre-ceremony welcome began, I clapped politely, took a small sip of champagne, and pretended I didn't notice how far I was from the head table. During cocktail hour, I wandered near the windows, looking out over the Chicago skyline, searching for something familiar, anything to ground me. That's when I heard them. "Who brought that thing?" one woman whispered, nodding toward the gift table. Another laughed, a sharp trill that cut through the soft saxophone in the background. "It's probably from the sister, the school teacher. Bless her heart." My jaw tightened. I turned my back to them. I wasn't eavesdropping. They just weren't whispering quietly enough. I pulled out my phone, sent a message to Sam. "I'm here. It's a lot." A moment later, the bubble popped up. "You're more than enough. Be proud. I'll be there soon." I let the words sink in. Sam had always seen the best in me, even when I couldn't. The laughter from across the room grew louder. Someone had picked up my gift. "Is this a tablecloth?" No. It's a blanket." God, did she knit it herself? "Don't be mean," someone said, though her voice sounded more amused than apologetic. "Oh, please," the first one replied. "We're just being honest. Who brings a homemade quilt to a wedding like this?" I couldn't move. I felt frozen, rooted to the floor by shame and silence. When I turned back toward the room, I caught a glimpse of Caroline standing with them. One of the women gestured toward the muslin-wrapped package, still laughing. Caroline looked. Her smile faded. She hesitated. For a split second, I hoped she'd say anything. But she didn't. She smoothed her dress, took a sip from her glass, then looked away. I stepped into the hallway and found the women's restroom. Inside, under soft lighting and mirrored walls, I stared at my reflection. My makeup was still in place. My hair hadn't frizzed, but I looked small, invisible. I took a shaky breath. This was a mistake. I should have stayed home, mailed the gift, avoided all of it. My hand drifted to the ribbon tied around the quilt, still holding something that mattered, something I believed in. But maybe I was the only one who did. Back in the ballroom, people were gathering for dinner. The band started playing a slow jazz number. Servers glided by with plated lamb and risotto. I returned to table 17, sat down, and folded my hands in my lap. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Just pulled up. See you soon. Sam. And suddenly, my pulse steadied, because no matter what anyone in that room thought of me, they hadn't met my husband yet. I don't know why I walked back toward the gift table. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was hope. Hope that someone, just one person, had looked past the wrapping and seen what was inside. But I knew better. I think I always did. A small crowd had gathered near the table. Not a crowd, really just a tight circle of women in glittering dresses, heels clicking against marble as they leaned in over the packages like judges at a show. One of them, a brunette in emerald green with a laugh like broken glass, was holding something in her hands. My package, wrapped in white muslin, the bow I had tied with so much care now hanging limp at the corner. "Oh, it's definitely homemade," she said, lifting it as if it weighed more than her tolerance. "Maybe it's a picnic blanket." Another offered, giggling. "I heard the sister lives on a farm." Someone else chimed in, phone in hand. "Oh my God, should I post this on the wedding reel?" Bless her heart. The laugh that followed wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to cut. I didn't move. I stood about 10 feet away, frozen behind a pillar, watching them mock the one thing I had poured weeks of myself into. I should have said something, should have stepped forward, taken it back, shouted that not everything valuable comes from a storefront, but my throat had closed up. The embarrassment came in waves, hot, then cold, then hot again. I felt like a child at a grown-up party, carrying a handmade card when everyone else brought diamonds. One of the women held up the bundle and said, "Let's open it. Caroline has to see this before dinner." No, someone said, "That's not fair." But it's hilarious. Just then, Caroline walked over. Her veil had been pinned back now, her champagne glass half full. She was radiant, glowing with the kind of light that comes when the world seems to orbit around you. "What's so funny?" she asked, smiling. They held up the gift. "Oh," she said. Her smile dimmed. "Just a little. Just enough. That's from Maggie." I waited for her to say something more, to laugh it off, to shut it down, to do what sisters do, but instead, she looked around, as if suddenly aware of how many people were watching. "She makes things sometimes," she said softly. "It's her thing." The woman in green raised an eyebrow. "Should we open it?" Caroline hesitated, and in that hesitation, I felt something break. "No," she said at last, forcing a polite smile. "Later, after dinner," and then she walked away. So did they, leaving my gift, my heart sitting there like a joke no one wanted to clean up. I escaped to the hallway again, this time walking faster. I passed gilded mirrors and marble statues that looked like they belonged in a museum, not a wedding. My heels echoed louder now, each step heavier than the last. I didn't stop until I reached the restroom again, where the lighting was too soft and too kind, like it didn't want to admit what it saw. I locked myself in a stall, and I cried, quietly, quickly, the way you do when you don't want to ruin your makeup or your pride. You would think at 37, you'd stop caring what people think. But there's something about being humiliated in public by people who don't know you, and worse, by people who do, that strips you down to the child inside, the one who still believes she might be enough if she just tries harder. I wiped my face with a tissue and stared at the closed door of the stall. The overhead light flickered slightly. Everything around me was polished, perfect, sterile, and I felt invisible. I thought of Sam, the way he always saw me, the way he never once made me feel small, and I hated that he would walk into this room soon and find me like this, humiliated, shrunken, trying to pretend it didn't hurt. I pulled out my phone. "You sure you're coming?" "You don't have to. It's okay." His reply came within seconds, already in the lobby, "Looking for you." I took a breath, then another. I opened the stall door, smoothed my dress, fixed my hair. It didn't matter what they thought of me. It mattered what I thought of myself. And what Sam saw when he looked at me was never a mistake. Back in the ballroom, the energy had shifted toward dinner. Lights were dimmer, candles flickered on every table, and the music had softened into something classical and forgettable. I returned to table 17, where no one seemed to notice I'd been gone. The same junior associate was now halfway through his second whiskey. The cousin was showing someone pictures of a new boat. No one spoke to me. That was okay. I checked my phone again. Nothing yet. Then, as if in a scene from a film I hadn't agreed to star in, I heard a murmur ripple across the room. Heads turned toward the entrance. A figure stood in the doorway. And just like that, the temperature in the room shifted. He was wearing a tailored charcoal suit, subtle pinstripes, no tie. His dark blonde hair had been combed neatly for once, and there was something in his stance still, sure, centered that pulled every wandering eye toward him. Sam Hartley, my husband. The man no one here had really met. The man they were about to. He spotted me almost immediately, and as he walked across the room, something unspoken moved with him. Recognition, disruption, a question whispered beneath every breath. "Who is that?" He leaned down, kissed my cheek. "Hey, sweetheart." His voice was steady, warm, like nothing in this place could touch him. "You okay?" he asked. "I will be," I whispered. His hand found mine under the table. Then, without saying anything more, he looked across the room. His jaw tightened slightly. His eyes scanned faces, not in judgment, but with quiet understanding. He saw everything, and I knew, in that moment, that whatever came next would change everything. When Sam walked into the ballroom, the room didn't go silent, not all at once. It started slowly, like the hush that follows a sudden gust of wind, a soft shift in the air. One table turned, then another. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. I watched from across the room as he stepped into a space where he didn't belong, at least not by their definition. And yet, he owned it, not with arrogance, not with wealth on display, but with that quiet, grounded energy I'd fallen in love with, the kind of presence that can't be bought. He walked with calm purpose, weaving through the sea of polished people like he had done it 1,000 times, yet without a hint of pretense. His suit fit like it had been made for him, which it had, though no one here would know that the tailor was a family-run business in Des Moines, not Milan. His shoes were polished but practical, no flashy logo, no gleam for attention shine. His eyes scanned the room until they found me. And then, for a moment, it felt like we were the only two people in that grand, glittering place. He smiled, just slightly his signature look, that familiar curve that always said, "I've got you." He reached me at table 17 and leaned down, brushing a kiss on my cheek like we were back in our kitchen, not in the middle of a ballroom full of strangers with opinions. "Hey, sweetheart," he murmured. "You found me," I whispered, trying not to let my voice tremble. He pulled out the chair beside mine and sat down, one hand resting lightly over mine beneath the white linen tablecloth. "I always do," he said. I could feel the eyes on us, not just the usual curiosity, but something deeper now, recognition that whoever this man was, he wasn't what they expected. They were right. Across the room, I saw Caroline glance our way. Her expression shifted, subtle, but unmistakable. Surprise, confusion, maybe even discomfort. Bryce turned, too. He didn't hide his reaction as well, a slight raise of the eyebrows, a murmur to the person beside him. They were noticing, everyone was, and I wasn't sure if that terrified me or felt like justice finally arriving. "I saw the gift table," Sam said quietly, eyes still scanning the room. I swallowed hard. It got attention, I know. He didn't sound angry or embarrassed. He sounded calm, measured, as if none of this surprised him. "I spoke with Bryce when I arrived," he added. "He told me a little about what happened." I looked away. I didn't mean to cause a scene. "You didn't," Sam said, his voice firm but kind. "They did." He let the silence sit between us for a few seconds. then leaned in slightly. "Would you mind," he said gently, "if I said a few words later tonight, just something short, after the toasts?" I turned to look at him fully. "Why?" "Because I think it's time they saw you clearly." "I don't need." "It's not for you," he said, squeezing my hand. "It's for the girl who braided your hair every Saturday. The one you made a quilt for." I blinked. The lump in my throat returned, heavier now. "What are you going to say?" He smiled again, the soft kind of smile that never asked for permission. Just the truth. The band shifted into a slow song as dinner service began. Servers moved with precision, placing plates of grilled filet and sea bass on each table. Silverware clinked, small talk resumed. But there was a new undercurrent in the room now. People kept glancing at Sam. They didn't know who he was, but they sensed something different. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. But he didn't need to be. He belonged not because of money, but because of something more disarming. He didn't care whether he belonged. I watched him as he leaned back in his chair, listening politely to the person next to him, nodding when appropriate. He asked a question about their law firm, another about their work with foster youth. He made people feel seen without ever seeking to impress them, and they didn't know what to do with that. Across the room, Bryce stood for his toast. He was charming, polished, just the right amount of humor and sentiment. He thanked Caroline's parents, toasted their future, made a subtle joke about the cake being gluten-free by popular demand. Everyone laughed, the kind of practiced laugh you hear in boardrooms and benefit galas. Then it was Caroline's turn. She was graceful, poised. Her voice didn't shake once. She thanked everyone for coming, said how lucky they felt, how grateful. Her eyes never found mine. When she sat down, applause filled the room. And then Sam stood up. It wasn't abrupt. He didn't clear his throat or tap a glass. He simply rose and nodded toward Bryce, who returned the gesture, slightly confused. Sam walked to the front of the room, his shoulders relaxed, his stride unhurried. The microphone was already live. He paused a moment, looking out over the room, and when he spoke, his voice was calm, warm, and impossibly clear. "Good evening. I know most of you don't know me. My name is Sam Hartley. A beat. I'm Maggie's husband." Just like that. Every eye turned to me. Every heart held its breath. Because somehow, in those few words, he'd reminded them all that I was still part of this story, that I was no longer invisible. And what he said next would become the moment none of them forgot. The room had fallen still, not quiet still, as if the chandeliers themselves were holding their breath. Sam stood alone at the front of the ballroom, hands loosely folded in front of him, the soft hum of the microphone warming under his voice. "My name is Sam Hartley," he repeated, scanning the sea of faces with gentle steadiness, "and I'm Maggie's husband." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. In fact, the hush in the room was so deep that even the clink of ice in a nearby glass sounded intrusive. "For most of my life," he began, "I've worked in rooms like this one. Not exactly like this. This one is fancier," he added with a small smile, a ripple of polite laughter trailing him. "But rooms full of people in suits, holding wine glasses, discussing markets, legacy, trends." He paused. "Let it settle. I've heard a lot of voices in those rooms, but very few ever sounded like hers." He turned slightly toward me. "When I met Maggie, she was tying a shoelace for one of her students outside the school where she teaches. It was cold. Her fingers were red, and she didn't seem to notice. She was focused on the little boy in front of her, making sure the knot was tight enough to hold, but loose enough to come off when needed." He smiled again, faintly. "That's who she is. She pays attention to things that don't shout for it." He stepped away from the podium slightly, as if to speak more person to person than speaker to audience. "And I know there's been talk tonight about gifts." Another pause. The air thinned. Gifts wrapped in ribbons, in numbers, in logos. He looked around slowly. And then there's Maggie's gift. My breath caught. I wasn't ready, But I also knew this was what the moment had been leading to. She spent 6 weeks making a quilt for her sister, Sam said, his voice softening. Each square cut from pieces of their childhood fabric from their mother's apron, their dad's work shirt, a curtain from their grandmother's kitchen. He let the silence do the work for a moment. No brand can replicate that, Caroline gasped audibly. I saw her hand rise to her mouth. Sam didn't look at her. He wasn't trying to shame anyone. He was reminding everyone. She didn't bring this gift because it was cheaper. He continued. She brought it because it meant something. Because love, in her world, is measured in time, in memory, in effort, in showing up even when you don't know if you'll be welcomed. He looked down briefly. A breath. When I arrived tonight, I overheard some things. Whispers, laughter, comments. He lifted his gaze again, not accusing, just honest, and that's okay. We all come from different places. But here's the thing about Maggie. His voice deepened just a bit, not louder, but with more gravity. She doesn't need to raise her voice to be heard, because when you listen, really listen, you'll find she's the loudest truth in the room. A long silence followed. Somewhere in the back, someone exhaled too loudly. A few heads lowered, eyes shifted. Then Sam reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. One last thing. He held it up, not dramatically, but clearly. Maggie and I wanted to give a different kind of gift as well. One that might be more familiar to some of you, but hopefully still rooted in meaning. He nodded toward Caroline and Bryce. During Christmas last year, Caroline mentioned a dream she had, a little house near Lake Geneva, a cabin, quiet, full of windows and light, a place to get away from the noise. He turned the envelope in his fingers, then stepped forward and handed it to Bryce, who stood stunned. This is the deed. A low murmur swept through the room. It's yours. No strings, no performance required. Caroline looked at me across the room, eyes wide, lips parted, stunned. I never told you I remembered that, I said softly. But I did. Sam stepped back to the mic one last time. We hope it becomes a place where you can stitch your own memories like Maggie does, with care and intention. Then he looked out across the ballroom, and his last words hung like light through stained glass. Because love isn't loud, but when it's real, it echoes. There was no applause at first, just silence, the kind that makes your chest ache with something unspoken. Then someone stood, slowly, followed by another, and then, like a wave, the room rose. Applause filled the air, not thunderous, but thick with something heavier than celebration. Understanding. And maybe the start of something honest. Carolyn rushed toward me. She didn't say anything at first, just folded into my arms like the little sister she once was, tears pressing into my shoulder. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I held her, not because I needed her apology, but because I finally saw the girl I remembered. In that moment, I realized Sam hadn't just changed the room. He'd unwrapped something deeper, not just a quilt, not just a cabin, but a truth, the kind that sits quietly in your heart and waits to be seen. The terrace was quiet. Beyond the glass doors, the ballroom pulsed with renewed energy, laughter, music, the clinking of champagne flutes. But out here, it was just us, just two sisters and the chill of a late Chicago night. Carolyn stood beside me, her arms wrapped around the quilt, still partially folded. She hadn't let it go since Sam handed it back to her during the applause. Not once. She pressed a hand to one square near the edge. Her fingers trembled slightly. This, she whispered, voice thick. This is from Dad's jacket. I nodded. The corduroy one he wore every Sunday. She gave a soft, broken laugh. God, I used to hate that jacket. I know. You said it made him look like a farmer pretending to be a professor. Caroline smiled through tears, and he'd say, better that than a professor pretending to be a farmer. We both laughed quietly, like children sneaking into the kitchen at midnight. She ran her fingers over another patch. The sunflowers, she said. Our old bedspread. Yours had a rip in the corner, I added. You used to stick your stuffed rabbit in it. Remember? She nodded slowly. Mr. Bixby. He disappeared when I was 10. You traded him, I reminded her, for 3 Lisa Frank stickers and a packet of Pop Rocks. Biggest regret of my childhood. Mine was letting you do it. We sat on the low stone bench at the edge of the terrace, the quilt spread between us like sacred ground. Caroline's voice softened. Why didn't you tell me about the cabin? Or about Sam? I watched her carefully. Would it have made a difference, I asked? Would knowing we had money have made the quilt mean more? She blinked, silent for a moment. No, she said finally. I don't think so. I nodded. We've always lived the same way, whether we had much or little. She sighed. You were never the poor sister. I was just the one too afraid to remember where we came from. A breeze picked up, stirring the ends of her veil. I was embarrassed, she admitted. Not of you, of myself. That surprised me. She went on. I saw that package on the table, and I knew instantly I hadn't brought anything half as personal. All those months of planning, all the money, and I never once thought to put actual love into anything. You planned a beautiful day. She shook her head, but I forgot why we were even doing it. I wanted it to be perfect, polished. I wanted to impress people who don't even know me. She looked down at the quilt again. You knew what mattered. We sat in silence for a while. Long enough for the sounds of the party to fade into background music. Then she turned to me, her eyes a little more focused. Would you maybe teach me how to make one? I blinked. A quilt. She nodded. Not this big, but something small. Something for later. Later. A soft flush rose to her cheeks. I haven't told anyone yet, not even Bryce. She reached for my hand. I'm pregnant. Tears rose to my eyes before I could stop them. I grabbed her hand tighter. Oh, Carrie. I breathed. That's wonderful. She looked down, almost shy. I was scared to tell you. Why? Because I thought I'd lost you. I shook my head. You didn't. You just took a detour. She smiled through glassy eyes. That detour had a really nice hotel. I laughed. Then I asked, do you know what you're having? Too early, she said. But if it's a girl, I'd like her to know about this. About us. I nodded, and something in me loosened. Something that had been knotted up for years. Inside, I could see Sam chatting with someone near the bar, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of water. He met my eyes through the glass, raised a brow. I gave him a small nod. I was okay. Caroline followed my gaze. He's amazing, she said. He is. I agreed. Why did he do all this? She asked. The cabin. The speech. It wasn't about showing off. No, I said. It was about reminding you. And maybe reminding me, too. That love isn't loud, but it's not invisible either. She leaned her head against my shoulder. I think I forgot what that felt like. I put my arm around her. Then let's both remember. Together. The quilt was still warm between us. But even if it hadn't been, I think that night, for the first time in a long time, we were both wrapped in something real. Something that couldn't be bought or boxed, only remembered and passed on. 1 year later, the quilt hangs in a shadow box frame. It's displayed in the entryway of the Lake Geneva cabin, right above a narrow wooden table where Carolyn keeps fresh flowers and a dish for keys. Guests always notice it. They pause, comment on the colors, the textures, the odd patchwork of prints that seem too personal to be decorative. That one, Carolyn always says, touching a square with sunflowers, was our childhood bedspread. She tells them about the apron scrap, the jacket lining, the curtain swatch. Sometimes, she even tells them about Mr. Bixby, and every time, her voice softens just a little. We visit the cabin a few weekends each season. In spring, we help plant vegetables in raised beds along the side. In summer, we eat watermelon on the porch and let our feet dangle off the dock. In fall, we sit wrapped in blankets, sipping cider, while the trees go from gold to fire. And in winter, the quilt comes down from the wall for one sacred night. We lay it across the couch, build a fire, and let it warm our laps as we tell stories from the years we lost and found. Caroline's daughter, Lily, was born on a soft October morning, 7 pounds, 2 ounces, with her mother's nose and my father's quiet eyes. The first time I held her, Caroline whispered, "She's going to grow up knowing who she is." I kissed Lily's forehead and said, "Then she'll never forget where love begins." Sam and I still live in the same house, the same porch swing, the same kitchen where the kettle whistles at 6:15 every morning. His business has grown, slowly and quietly, the way he always preferred. He never talks about the Forbes feature, never even framed the article. Instead, he framed the thank you letter from Caroline. It's in his study, right above the bookshelf, where he keeps the novels I lent him when we first met. Sometimes he sits in that room at night, glasses on, reading in the quiet. When I ask him if he ever regrets living smaller than our means, he smiles and says the same thing every time I live exactly as wealthy as I want to be. People still ask us about the wedding. Some say, "That speech, I think about it all the time." Others ask what made Sam stand up, what pushed him to do it. But they never really ask the right question. The question isn't what made him do it, it's who. It wasn't to make a point. It wasn't revenge. It was love. A kind of love that refuses to let another person shrink into the shadows just because the room forgets how to look. The quilt is fading a little now, from light and from time. That doesn't bother us. Love should fade in places it means it's been used. It means it's done its job, but it's still strong and still stitched, square by square, into the rhythm of who we are. Caroline and I talk every week now, not about galleries or brands or registries. We talk about preschool snacks and bedtime tantrums, about Mom's old potato salad recipe, about how Lily discovered her toes and hasn't stopped trying to eat them. Sometimes we talk about the wedding, but rarely. That night doesn't define us anymore. It just reminds us of how easy it is to forget what matters and how beautiful it is to remember. At dinner recently, Caroline looked across the table and said, "I'm sorry it took a quilt and a speech to see you again." I reached for her hand. "You never stopped seeing me," I said. "You just needed to remember how. We're not perfect, but we're stitched back together. And that, I think, is the greatest gift. Not the quilt, not the cabin, not even the apology, but the quiet return of something we thought we'd lost." When people ask me what I brought to the wedding that changed everything, I never mention the gift. I just say I brought a reminder. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can give is a memory someone forgot they needed. If you're reading this and you've ever felt overlooked, if you've ever been told that what you offer isn't enough, if you've ever been laughed at for leading with your heart, then I hope this story reminds you you don't need glitter to be seen, you don't need money to give something priceless, and you don't need a room full of applause to matter. True wealth, the kind that lasts, is stitched quietly and given without a receipt. As we grow older, we begin to understand that the most valuable things in life can't be wrapped in ribbons or bought in stores. Love, sacrifice, forgiveness. These are stitched quietly into everyday moments, into hands that hold, words that stay, and memories that refuse to fade. Maggie's story reminds us that dignity doesn't come from wealth, but from how we carry ourselves when we are overlooked. And sometimes, the greatest gift we can give is not something that sparkles, but something that speaks. It's easy, in this fast, loud world, to feel invisible, to wonder if what we offer still matters. But it does. The quilt in Maggie's hands, the truth in Sam's voice, the tear in Caroline's eyes, all of it, whispers a truth we too often forget. Real love doesn't shout, but it always echoes. So if you're ever told that you're too simple, too soft, or too small, remember, the quietest hearts often carry the loudest love. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it touched your heart, made you reflect, or reminded you of something precious, please don't keep it to yourself. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that heal, inspire, and stay with you long after they end. from our heart to yours. Thank you for being here.